excited.
Outstanding. So Renee is going to tell us about how to build and manage your team, which if you've been in the video game industry as long as I have, almost nobody knows this. So this is going to be a very valuable lesson. Go ahead. Do you want a microphone?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
Hi, so my name is Renee, and I'd like to teach you what I've learned about building teams and team management. Even if you don't plan on building a team anytime soon, I think a lot of information here is particularly applicable to almost anything where you're working with more than one person. So, first of all, I should introduce myself. So who am I? Well, I'm a lot of things. I'm a cosplayer, a beer lover. I love food. I'm a martial artist. I'm a level 100 feral druid with almost 720 item level. And I'm kind of a crazy cat lady in some ways. Really. So who am I in a way that's relevant to this talk? Well, so I founded and am the CEO and creative director of Stumbling Cat. I'm currently working on building a game called Potions of Curious Tale, and I've built a team around that. I volunteer at Foundry 10, where I mentor students in game development and programming to help them with their projects. So I help them with their team management. I'm also an advisor to Foundry 10 for their interactions to get VR into school districts. And then, of course, I'm an IGDA Seattle board member, so I help organize events like this, which obviously requires some team management as well. In the past, I was a producer at Fixer Studios. I worked as a lead in the biotech industry, and I actually received my degree in engineering with a focus on project management and mechanical engineering, which is not quite as relevant to this talk. So, it's time to build a team. Well, or is it? Are you ready for a team? There's some questions you should ask yourself, because if you build your team too early, you're wasting your resources and everyone's time, really. So first of all, do you have a strong project vision? You have to know what you're trying to make before you can build a team around it. And one of the ways to know that you have a strong project vision, even if you think you have it, is to plan it out, to do a proof of concept. Doesn't matter if you're prototyping by actually making a small version of a game, or if you're just doing it on pen and paper. But having a version of your game that you can analyze and make sure that it is the way that you want to build it is really important before you start building your team around that. So you need to know what you need from other people. You can't build a team unless you know what you need your team to do. That seems pretty straightforward. And I wouldn't build a team until you can implement their work immediately. With Potions of Curious Tale, I do all of the programming and design on the project, and I spent 6 months on the project, building up the project before I got anyone else on the team, because it was at that point that I actually needed, finalized art assets or finalized sounds. So all the work that I did before was sort of doing my proof of concept, and I didn't pull on an artist early only to find out that I wasn't going to be able to complete the game, or I didn't have a solid vision for it. And then compensation is really important. I know that's actually a really big issue in our industry, especially for people who are just starting out, but you should compensate your team. And there are various ways to do that, which I'll go over later. So, now that you've decided that it's time to make a team, you need to figure out where you get your teammates from. A common type of teammate that comes to mind first is friends. Some people think that friends are really good to work with, some think that they should never work with their friends. That's up to you, but friends, at least you know well. People that you also know well are your associates. So people that you've met at work, maybe people that you know more casually, and these are really good people to work with because you kind of have an understanding of their personalities, of how they work, but you might not ruin friendships if there's a hard day at work. And through your friends and associates, you can get recommendations. Recommendations are really valuable because they give you more information about the people that you're potentially going to be bringing on to work with your team or on your team. And then finally, there's the internet. And the internet is a really amazing resource to find people to work on your team. There's a few resources here that I've listed. I think the one that requires explanation are skill-oriented forums. So if you're looking for an artist, instead of just looking on the Unity forums or on more general forums, if you go to an art forum, like if you're looking for a 3D modeler, if you go to a 3D modeler forum, you're more likely to find someone that has the skill sets you're looking for, and you can probably find their work that's posted and see basically a free portfolio, free version before you can contact them. So when you're looking at teammates, there are certain qualities that you should look for. I think the first and foremost quality that is important in teammates is that they're eager to learn. The game industry, software in general, is a particularly tumultuous and constant changing industry. So it helps to have someone who is eager to learn and adapt those new skills. Similarly, they should be willing to teach themselves, because someone can be eager to learn but wants you to feed them all that knowledge. And that's just, that takes too much time. So instead, you should find someone that's eager to learn and is going to go out there and teach themselves those skills that they need for your project. On your project, you need to have someone who's willing to accept criticism and takes it well. If somebody produces something that's not exactly what you wanted or not up to snuff, they should be able to accept constructive criticism well and make modifications without having their feelings get hurt. Because if you have someone who does get hurt over those things, it can lead to extreme complications when you're trying to polish your product. Similarly, they should also be able to provide feedback. It really helps to have a teammate who is active, who's willing to discuss things with you, and who's willing to point out their criticism of your own work. That way you can start getting feedback and making your game the best it can be before you get to the QA stage. And one thing that should be considered is that they should be compatible with the team. Just because somebody works well with you doesn't mean they'll work well with the teammates that you've already acquired. And I've made this mistake before, and it caused a lot of turmoil in my team. It caused wasted time, and it actually took a little while to recover from it. And I didn't think about it initially because the person and I worked well together. I was familiar with his quirks, but it didn't work well with the rest of my team, and it's something I should have considered beforehand. And then finally, you want someone who's invested. And there's different ways to make sure that someone's invested. They can be invested because there's something that they're learning that they're really passionate about. They can be invested because they absolutely love your project. And they can be invested because you're compensating them. I mean, money is a motivator, right? Okay, so finally, really, you should make sure they're competent. I mean, this is obviously what everyone looks for. If you're getting an artist, you want to have an artist who draws well. If you're getting an audio designer, you want to have one who makes work that you appreciate. However, I really do think that it's more important to have someone that's eager and willing to learn than it is to have someone who has a perfect skill set. Because someone who has a great skill set and is not willing to teach themselves, their skills are going to stagnate and they might not be able to move forward with your project as your project grows and develops. So, compensation, talking about the sort of investment side of things. There are a lot of ways to compensate people. Smaller teams, a lot of the time, prefer sharing ownership. That sort of covers a lot of things, but if you guys form a company together, then everyone is sort of taking these same risks and potentially getting the same benefits. Less strictly, there's profit sharing. So you could say, all right, if this game's, or when we finish this game and it starts selling, you get 20% of all profits made on the game. And that's really common, especially in indie scene, for sharing profits. However, something to consider is having uncapped versus capped profit sharing. So uncapped profit sharing is just what it sounds like. They get 20% for the rest of their life. Capped profit sharing is really helpful, especially when you're bringing people on midway through the project or at the end of the project, where you don't have money to pay them up front, but they haven't made maybe even years-long investments that the rest of your team has. So what you do with a capped profit sharing is you say, okay, you'll get 5% of all profits up to $50,000 or $100,000. And that means that if you make the next Minecraft, you're not suddenly out millions of dollars because you brought someone on to polish up a few assets for you at the end of your game. And of course, the most obvious type of compensation is payment. You can pay people salary. You can pay them hourly, and you can also pay them per asset. These all have their different benefits, especially when you have new teammates. It can be more risky to take them on by paying them for their time overall, because you don't know how long it takes them to work on an asset. Paying per asset means that You pay them either prior to their creation of or after their creation of something that you need. Like you need a sprite or you need a sound file. And experience, portfolio building, and exposure are not compensation. If someone tries to tell you they're compensation, they're not. While these are all great things and reasons to work on a project, they're not the sole reason to work on a project, because you can get those working on any project. And so you should make sure that you're being compensated properly for your work. So there are different types of management styles that can be used on a project. And you can use a combination of these. In fact, many people do on projects. The first one is actually kind of an old style. It's Gantt chart style, the work breakdown structure style. It's often called waterfall in software. So it's kind of a tree-based structure where you take the overall project and break it down into all its small components and then assign them by timelines. And one of the things that this is really great at pointing out are critical paths, because you mark blockers. And blockers are items which need to be completed before another item can start. So you need to build the wall before you can paint the wall blue. Thus building the wall is a blocker for painting the wall. And if you follow all of these blockers down to the end of the product, that's called the critical path. And that is what controls when your product's going to be released. This is really great for milestone planning, especially if you're working with a publisher. Publishers will not accept anything but something basically like this. You have to tell them what the deliverables are, when you plan to get the deliverables to people, and that sort of path. Unfortunately, it's really inflexible, and it doesn't work well for software development. It especially doesn't work well for game development because it is product-based. It's not fun game-based. So when you have design iterations and things like that, you either have to schedule them in, and who knows if you've scheduled enough, or maybe you scheduled too many. It's just sort of hard to fit into the world of games. Another type of management system is called Kanban. Kanban is used a lot in manufacturing, and it basically consists of buckets. So you have a bucket like started, or getting painted, or in processing. And you take each task and you sort of move them around, and quite literally it's often Post-it notes. If you're familiar with Trello, Trello is a Kanban system. So the advantage of this is it has high visibility. Everybody can tell which task is where, what state it's in, and move them around easily. It also engages the team, because when your team's working on a task, each teammate has that task. They move it to the bucket that they're doing, like drawing. It's in the drawing bucket, and then it'll go into the needs to be colored by somebody else bucket. And it's really engaging that way. But the downside of that means that it requires a lot of work. It's kind of tasky to do. And on the same side of Gantt, it's really inflexible. I mean, you have defined buckets, which in game development doesn't always happen. The final style that I'm sure everyone's probably familiar with if you've worked in software is Agile. So Agile is kind of like the hot type of management styles recently. And it's basically based around reoccurring meetings, which are normally called Scrum meetings. And these meetings are where the team catches up with what they've done, what they need to do next, and they talk about blockers if there are any. This is a very personal style, and it works really well for small teams. It makes everyone feel connected, and like they know what's going on. The problem with this style, though, and with Agile, is that it's really bad for hitting milestones. Like, you have to have another management style combined with it to keep on track for those things, and it's really easy to get sidetracked. As a project manager, Agile requires more strictness from you than any other system, because you can't fall back on a chart. You have to say, no, we can't add this feature, we can't allow scope creep. But it's really great overall. So on the management tools side, to help enforce these styles, there's communication tools. Obviously email, something to consider is if you want to have a company email, or if everyone should just use their normal Gmail accounts. If you have a cloud-based studio with people you met online or who don't live together, you need voice communication. Funnily enough, I didn't put in the phone here because I don't know if anyone has group calls on phone anymore. And communication platforms that are really useful are things like Slack, chat and Campfire. My team uses Slack. What's really nice about Slack is you can communicate and create channels for communication and discussion and share files. So it sort of covers a lot of things that you normally do with email, but is in a less formal, more versatile manner. So there's task tracking. As I mentioned, Trello before is kind of a task tracking system. That's Kanban. There's Bitbucket, Jira, and Asana, and these are all based around tasks where you triage them, like put their order of severity, and they're really good for bug tracking and bug fixing. And then finally, I felt like I should mention this, is source control. Hopefully everyone's familiar with source control. If you're making a game, you should be familiar with source control. And if you're not familiar with source control, make yourself familiar with source control, or else you're going to find yourself in a world of headaches when something goes wrong. Source control or version control is basically a way of managing and saving a project in changes versus the entire project file. It means that if you made a change 3 months ago that you decided that you don't want anymore, you can easily just pull that change out without having to rebuild your whole project from that point onwards. So, in managing your team, building a routine is really important. The benefits of building a routine is it helps you follow the milestones, it allows for better time estimates. If you are meeting with your team once a week, you know about how much work your team can do in a week, and that makes planning for the future a lot easier. It also maintains project momentum. If your team's used to your project moving forward because people are constantly responsible for coming and doing their chores, basically. And it keeps track of the project when everyone's brain has turned to mush. If you are used to, okay, every Wednesday we have this design meeting for 1 hour, everyone knows that on Wednesday they're supposed to have that design meeting, and when you are in the middle of crunch in an 80-hour week, you know that you should still be working on design, and it helps you from turning into a zombie. So finally, what's really important is interacting with your team. I mean, we're all people, right? Like, your team is composed of people with emotions and feelings, and it helps to give them well-defined goals, just so they know what they're supposed to do, what you need from them. Don't expect people to manage themselves. Give them tasks. Give them honest feedback. I mean, there's nothing worse in a team than having barriers because someone can't be honest with you and you can't be honest with them. Having an honest feedback loop with your team is really important to making a good game. Provide a platform. We discussed the platforms earlier, with which they can all be heard and how they can talk with each other. And it's really important, especially if you have someone who's more shy in their team, your team, is to give them a way to contact you and express any problems they have or any concerns that fits them and fits their personality. And establish a decision structure. There's nothing worse than having a team and having them argue about what needs to be done and not having a way to say this is actually the way. So, I mean, obviously you can just make yourself the decider and say, okay, yeah, we'll talk about this, but when it comes down to it, I'm the person who gets to put my foot down. You can assign discipline leads. If you have a slightly larger team, if you have multiple artists, you can assign one artist to make the final decision no matter what. Or you can have a more democratic structure, but you have to keep to it. You have to make it vote for everything. And really be nice. Like, we're all people, and being nice and honest with your team helps them work better. So, for a quick overview, build your team when you're ready and not a moment sooner. Recruit teammates who are going to grow with your project. Establish your tools, provide compensation, and treat everyone with respect.